And I'm live. Greetings and welcome to Act One, a Canadian take on news events, starting a little later than I had originally intended, because as regular viewers know, we have a new family member who, Max, Max, come get your treat. Max is very attached to my 12-year-old, my youngest, Max, and I wanted to show him off again. So if you don't mind sticking around for a minute or so, I'll bring the genuine purebred mongrel hound onto the podcast. And here comes my 12-year-old now. There he is. You get to meet someone else too. This is Max, who's tired, had a long day today. You did a good boy. You did a good boy. Here it is. Here it is. There's your treat. And yeah, genuine. Danny's writing, "Oh, what a cutie." And Max is a part boxer, part border collie, part Springer Spaniel, part goodness knows what else. So he came into the family on Tuesday. He's a good dog. We're going through the house training phase. It's a little hit and miss right now. Puppies have tiny bladders and they need to go out every couple 3 hours. And then you take him out and gets right in the house and piddle. The piddler. All right, you ready to go? You ready to go down? You a good boy? Oh, I get kisses. All right, down you go. Go home. So once again, welcome to Act One, a Canadian take on news events. That is Max, my co-host, or as Whale Oil Beef dubbed him, my new pawcaster. I like that, pawcaster. Not my line, though. I stole that from Whale Oil Beef, who shows up a lot of times. He's out in British Columbia. Danny, who's moderating tonight's live stream, and most of them, is in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And you also got to meet my 12-year-old. And you're watching an AI-free podcast or an AI-free YouTube channel with none of the content being generated knowingly using artificial intelligence. What you see is what you get, bare bones, basic, and raw. As I like to say, and I've been admonished for it. Someone said, "Oh, don't call your station miserable and pathetic." But you know what? At the end of the day, it is what it is. No mic, no professional lighting, no professional camera, no green screen, none of the bells and whistles that so many other stations have. And if you like that kind of thing, if you like bare bones basic, Nancy has made it as well. She's our other moderator. Nancy and Danny are the tag team, and they're both from Montreal. So don't think that you can get away with spamming the station en français parce que les deux sont bilingues. Both of them are bilingual. And I'm reasonably bilingual myself. I lived in Quebec from 2011 to 2015 while I was serving in the military and posted to Valcartier in the town of Courcelette, Quebec, north of Quebec City. At any rate, what did I want to talk about tonight? I wanted to talk about the Canadian political scene and about the honeymoon that Mark Carney is experiencing. And I think that is a fair assessment to say that Mark Carney is in a honeymoon phase. And you hear this a lot in political parlance. You'll hear when a new government, when a new official, when someone takes elected office, the initial period is often referred to as a honeymoon. And if you think about it, it's a very apt description for those of us who have been married in years gone by. Couples rarely live together prior to getting married. And, you're in love, infatuated, and everything's sunshine and roses. And then as time goes on, you start to notice the peculiar, I can't even say the word, the little picadillos that your partner for life has. and things can, the honeymoon phase lasts a period of time and then it goes away. And at what point are Canadians going to get over their seeming infatuation with Mark Carney? If the polls are to be believed, and I think they are reasonably on the money, they show Mark Carney polling even higher. Mark Carney and his Liberals are polling even higher now than they did during the most recent April 28th election. Their polling numbers are higher than what they achieved on voting day. And I think that is simply because Canadians are willing to give, at this point, Mark Carney the benefit of the doubt. We've just had a near, I think it's $78 billion deficit announced. And yet, again, Canadians are still willing to give Mark Carney the benefit of the doubt. They look at his business experience. He, came from the investment banking world, Goldman Sachs, and then he was the head of Brookfield Asset Management. Prior to that, he'd been governor of the Bank of England, governor of the Bank of Canada. So there's this perception, at least, that he has all the requisite knowledge, skills, the background to guide a large economy like Canada's. And so people are willing to give him a lot of rope. And I would argue that it's similar in fashion to what happened all the way back in 2015 when Justin Trudeau was elected. Justin Trudeau came in after in around 10 years of conservative rule under Stephen Harper, and Harper handed Trudeau a balanced budget. The budget was balanced when Justin Trudeau came into power in 2015, and Trudeau had committed to engaging and re-engaging, taking us back to deficit spending, but he referred to it as an investment. We're investing, we're going to have small deficits for the first couple of years, and then over the ensuing couple of years, we're going to bring it back and give Canada back the balanced budget that Stephen Harper had managed. And as we all know, the deficits didn't disappear. They kept growing. And now here we are, 2025, 10 years later. And instead of a small little $10 billion deficit, now we have approaching a $70 billion deficit. I think what am I saying? Approaching an $80 billion deficit. And it's absolutely insane the amount of money that we are buried in. Right now, Canada spends, I think it's over $50 billion a year simply on paying the interest, the minimum monthly payment on the debt. However, again, Canadians right now, Trudeau's gone. They're willing to give Carney the benefit of the doubt. Justin Trudeau embarked us on significant deficit spending, but let's see how this plays out. Let's see if this works, was the attitude under Justin Trudeau. And we're doing it again. We're saying with Mark Carney, okay, let's see how it plays out. He's promising to invest heavily in the military. He's promising to invest heavily in infrastructure projects. Maybe this time we'll see some pipelines, Northern Gateway, I forget the name, Energy East. Maybe we'll see these projects actually come to fruition. Right now, I don't think there are no shovels in the ground. What we're hearing is, the process is moving forward. The process, no actual results, but the process is moving forward. We're making progress toward that. That's a big thing that happens in Ottawa. A lot of progress being made. Meanwhile, is it tangible? No, it's progress that's in the ether. It's in the committee rooms, in the back rooms, in the meetings with Danielle Smith and Mark Carney. Well, we're making progress. Well, when do the shovels get into the ground? When do sections of that pipeline actually start being laid? When do they start moving oil? Alberta's enormous wealth in oil and natural gas, LNG. When do they make their way to international markets? And my suspicion is that Carney's got about a year. Carney has about a year to show some results. And then if it ends up being just more rinse and repeat, a continuing increase in the cost of living, stagnant wages, stagnant growth in the economy, then Canadians are going to sour on Mark Carney just as they soured on Justin Trudeau. Now, there was a budget that just passed this past Monday. I think the date was the 17th, and it passed by a margin of 170 to 168. So all 170 sitting Liberal members, including they got one vote from Elizabeth May's Green Party. She's the only seat. Her entire party, the entire caucus of the Green Party won, voted in favor of the budget. So that took the Liberals from 169, which they would have had, to 170. As it turned out, Mark Carney actually didn't need Elizabeth May's vote because two members of the Conservatives and two members of the NDP abstained, meaning they did not vote at all. Had all four of those members voted, then potentially the budget, not potentially, then the vote count would have been 172 against to 170 in favor. However, I'm here to say that neither Pierre Poilievre nor the NDP, and I can't even remember the name of their interim leader because Jagmeet Singh has resigned the leadership of the party and they're being led by an interim leader right now. Neither one of those two parties want an election because right now they recognize the direction of the political winds and they recognize that Mark Carney has something of the wind in his sails, and the wind is not in the sails of either the NDP or the Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre. So they do not want an election right now, but at the same time, they want to be able to tell Canadians, our party voted against the budget. We did not support the budget. Well, then if you didn't support the budget, you should have had both your members vote who abstained, and there is remote voting allowed. So if a sitting member is unable to be in the House of Commons when the vote is taking place, be it for health reasons or whatever, they can cast a vote remotely, but that didn't happen. Even if, though, the Conservatives had cast their two abstaining members, even if they had cast votes against the budget, regardless, it would have been then a tie, 170 to 170. And in the case of a tie, the Speaker of the House, who is a member of the Carney Liberal Party, he, in this case, it is a guy, he would cast the deciding vote. So, any thoughts from you guys, Danny or Nancy or anyone else watching, on what? Yeah, it's a bit disconcerting for those of us who are conservative minded who would love to see Mark Carney kicked to the curb. But Danny's writing, we don't want an election yet. We don't want Carney either. What are we to do? And right now, we're basically stuck with him. Canadians chose on April 28th a significant minority of the population and the largest share of the popular vote, although not by a big margin, voted to have Canada led by Mark Carney's Liberal Party. So we are stuck with them. At the same time, I think there's a tendency for me to want to take a step back and say to myself, well, wait a minute, do I want Mark Carney to fail? And do I want Canada to not do well so that Mark Carney can be defeated? Ultimately, I think our main hope, wish, desire should be for Canada to fare well, for our economy to do well, for the cost of living to become more affordable, and for life to get better in Canada. And if that happens, whether it's Pierre Poilievre or Mark Carney, hey, ultimately what we want is good governance. Yeah, so it can sound a little partisan. It can sound like partisanship on steroids to not be willing to give Mark Carney the benefit of the doubt, to want his government to fail, for Canada's economy to falter, also that my side can win. I'm willing, I hope that Energy East, that the Northern Gateway pipeline, that these infrastructure projects that will build up our economy, I hope they go forward, but we will see. Uh, and Danny says the most important thing at the end of the day, and he always puts this up there: Jesus is king. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and all this is, secondary to that. And then Nancy chimes in with, let King Carney sink himself a bit more. Well, right now he's not sinking. He's actually doing better. And there is speculation amongst many that Carney would actually like to trigger an election. He would like to, that Carney would not have been upset if his budget had been defeated, because if that had happened, then he would go to the polls 4 or 5 weeks' time. And if things were to remain the way they are now, that he could be returned with a full on majority government. I think it's 172 seats are needed out of the 343. I think you need 172. He's just seats shy. He's got 169. Uh, and Nancy goes on to say that people are not ready yet. They want to be fleeced raw. We want to get totally, let's give them plenty of rope. And the only thing is, if things do go badly, if they do continue as they have been for the past 10 years of liberal rule, that's an even bigger mess for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives to clean up. And this is, it's not a good situation that we're in, unfortunately. I mean, if you're watching this station, I am one of those voices that happens to agree with the idea being put forward from so many corners that Mark Carney is simply a puppet of globalist forces, primarily the World Economic Forum and the UN. And we have to remember that those two bodies formed a partnership uh, back, I think it was in 2019, that the UN, United Nations, and the WEF, World Economic Forum, they signed on to a partnership. And the partnership is centered around putting the planet onto a path of sustainability. And we have these UN, I think it's 17 sustainable development goals, the SDGs, and Carney is certainly all over that. He is big, he talks a big game about reducing carbon footprint and everything like that. But at the same time, individuals on the environmental side, like Elizabeth May, are starting to question how committed Mark Carney is to so-called carbon net zero, when he's seems to be moving forward, progressing on the idea of Northern Gateway, Eastern Energy East, on pipeline development. Well, is Carney sucking and blowing at the same time? I think it's very high. I think it's likely and very conceivable that Carney recognizes that global warming and this whole climate change narrative is really just a red herring designed to scare the population into giving up more of our freedoms, more of our rights, more of our liberties, to transition us to an Orwellian dystopian future where the government is monitoring us 24/7, carbon footprint. What are you spending your money on? Let's bring in a social credit score like they have in China. It's scary. Uh, and then Eat Me's writing further that we have not been in a good situation since March of 2020. That's when the COVID insanity, the COVID nonsense all started. And actually, I've got a thought ruminating around in my head to do for a video that I may publish in the future, but I haven't put committed anything to writing yet. It's a video that I would want to do, but in a fashion this be a bit of a spoiler alert, in a fashion, I almost miss the COVID mandates, which that may sound really strange coming from me, but I view the broader population, the great unwashed, you know, of us. I'm talking, just, your your bare bones basic Canadians and bare bones basic Americans and Europeans, the great unwashed, the proletariat, to use a Marxist term, or the proles, to use an Orwellian term. Uh, that we there's a war being waged against us, but it's mostly a shadow war. And when COVID came out, I saw that as the enemy kind of showing his cards, coming out. It was no longer sniping at us, no longer engaging in guerrilla tactics, but was actually coming right out onto the open field of battle. And you could see him for the first time with the ridiculous rules that we all had to live under. You know, go into a restaurant and you have to wear a mask. But once you sit down, you can take the mask off because COVID stopped spreading. And I'll just use that as just one example. Most people will remember that rule. I think it was pretty much universal in Canada and in much of the world, where when you went into after they allowed restaurants to open, they required you to wear a mask when you went inside. And but once you sat down, you could take the mask off. But if you had to get up to go to the bathroom, then you were to put the mask back on. This is so numbingly brain dead stupid in my estimation. This idea that what when I'm standing, the virus can infect me, but if I'm sitting, I can't. My respiratory droplets, because I'm speaking moistly now, it's okay when I'm seated, but not standing. Talk about stupidity. One thing that I liked is you got to see in society who were the morons going along with this nonsense, who was willing to accept it blindly and just go along with everything, and you could at least identify them. Now that that there's a veneer of normalcy over everything, who are the idiots? It's not, you can't tell anymore. Now, if you're dealing with someone who you can fall back in your memory bank and say, okay, they went along with COVID, so they'll probably go along with anything else. But if you're dealing with a new person who you don't know what their reaction to COVID, you didn't know how they dealt with everything. So, in a fashion, I almost miss the COVID mandates because the battle was right out in front of us. Um, and Danny's saying to call them by their proper name, the sheeple. And he goes on to say faith over fear. Getting back to climate change, global warming, Nancy is saying that the whole carbon scare is based on suppositions that if we don't go green, the temperature will rise globally by 1 degree Celsius by the year 2000. I have difficulty with the whole measurement of this. How do you determine planetary temperature? And I know that back in the 1800s, they started to track temperature data. They said, all right, we need to track temperature data. And even then, even back then, there was a realization that large urban centers, because of the number of people, because of the lack of trees, because things are, it became even more apparent as we moved into the age of concrete and asphalt, that there is a phenomenon called urban heat. And I don't know the exact numbers, but large urban city centers with all their concrete and asphalt are known to be 1, 2 degrees Celsius, maybe more, higher than outlying areas in the same geographic area because cities capture, hold, retain, and give off heat. So when they set up their weather stations to monitor temperatures, they place them well outside of those urban centers. Well, cities over the decades, over the last century, century and a half, cities have expanded, 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 and now the city has taken over these once remote areas where they had their climate stations to track things like temperature. But they won't move them because it needs to be in the same spot. There's a phenomenon called microclimates, and I experienced that in spades when I lived in Quebec City. I lived in Val Belair, which is the most northern part of Quebec City. Quebec City, like Toronto, like so many places, went through something called amalgamation, where they took Saint Foy, Loretteville, Limoilou, and they took all these areas. These former once had been separate municipalities, separate cities, and they amalgamated them all into the city of Quebec, La Ville de Quebec. And Val-Bélair is the most north. It's the last city you get to before you end up in Courcelette, where Valcartier is. And it's nestled right into the Laurentian Mountains. And so 15, 20 minutes south, and I'm going down the Henri IV and then on to the 40, and I can be in downtown Quebec City. And I would look at the weather. I would check the weather, and it would say, it's -10, bright and sunny, gorgeous day with no clouds. And I'd look out my window, and there'd be a blizzard outside. And that's because my little area was referred to as a microclimate, even though, it wasn't in terms of distance, it was like 30, 40 kilometers, 15, 20 minutes. I could be downtown in Quebec City proper. So weather systems you need to be tracking from a few kilometers can make a ton of difference. And so how how, how reliable are the numbers when we hear that the temperatures are increasing over time versus what they were like back in, say, the 1800s, early 1900s? Well, back in the 1800s, early 1900s, that weather station that you have was in the middle of nowhere. It was a rural location. Now it's in a built up suburban urban area. Let me catch up on what's being said. And Danny goes on to say, when he wrote Faith Over Fear, he makes fear an acronym and says it says false evidence appearing real, or face everything and rise. Very good. Uh, False evidence appearing real. No kidding. How many times during the COVID era did we hear about evidence-based science? We're following the science, and the science just kept evolving. The vaccines are 95% effective, 80% effective, 75% effective, and down and down and down. The effectiveness ratio kept going. And the likes of the Justin Trudeau's of the world and the Mark Carney, being advised by Mark Carney, we're all in on this stuff. Max Power has shown up, who's got the same name as my new dog who came out. Hey, Max. Although Max is pretty tired. He was outside today. I had him out a lot because you got to take a puppy out several times a day. Uh, and Danny goes on to say that you can't scare a God-fearing man. The Bible says 365 times. The words translated into English as "fear not" appear 365 times. Christians are not to we're to rebuke fear. Fear is the language of the enemy. That's satanic. Satan wants us afraid because he knows when we are afraid that we're easy to manipulate, to control, easy to get us to do evil. And you look at the evil you saw happening during COVID when someone would be assaulted, even by law enforcement, for not wearing a diaper on their face. Imagine being in a restaurant and standing up to go to the bathroom and forgetting to take your mask with you. Oh my gosh, you're going to kill us all. Yeah. And for trying to force face diapers, trying to force masks onto toddlers, onto 2 and 3-year-olds in daycare centers. Come on, Justin, put on your mask. Tell you something about personal protective equipment. It is only to be handled by the individual wearing it. No one else should be handling another individual's PPE, and especially and categorically medical grade PPE like a mask. Put it on to someone else. And yet we had daycare workers trying to force toddlers to wear it. That was disgusting. So where I talk about now during the COVID era, I could look and I could go, okay, this is a person who is not to be trusted. This is a person in the enemy camp. I'm going to love that person. I'm going to do my darndest to show compassion and love and caring. But at the same time, I want to know. I want to know who I can trust and who I cannot. Max has shown up. Wait, before I go to there, Nancy wrote, we have always baked in cities, especially in downtown areas, Montreal, Houston, LA, Toronto, doesn't matter. Cities are always hotter. And most will know that the color black, anything black, retains heat, white reflects heat. And our cities are covered in asphalt. Max Power is writing, saying happy Sunday to myself, to everyone. And Nancy's echoing that, as is Danny. Then Max says, my current working theory is that Mark Carney's honeymoon ends with massive currency devaluation and possible hyperinflation. And he notes the Weimar Republic of Germany before the Hitler era, before the Nazi era, pre 1933, when there was hyperinflation in that country because they just kept printing more money. And back then, money was printed physically. They would have a printing press, I've mentioned before. At one point, they nationalized all the German printing mills to print out more and more money. And then they stopped printing on both sides of the bill so they could increase production, theoretically double production, only print on one side of the paper so that we can get more money out there. And people were getting paid after their day of work. They'd finish work and they would be paid immediately. And then they would immediately go to spend that money because by the time the following morning came around, the value of the currency would have gone down and everything was going up in price constantly on a daily basis. And now, in our digital era, it's the central banks, Bank of Canada, Bank of England, what they call the Federal Reserve Bank in the US, which are private corporations. They are not government institutions. These are private companies. They create more money. And I've said it many times, talking about people know the term or have heard the term quantitative easing, and they think that is what eased the financial crisis of 2007 8. And that's what allowed us to weather the storm of COVID. Well, quantitative easing simply means that governments, like the government of Canada, issues a government bond, and the bond is then sold to the Bank of Canada. And in order to purchase the bond, or the bonds, plural, the Bank of Canada simply creates more money. And that is inflationary because the number of goods in the marketplace does not change substantially. So you have more dollars chasing the same number of goods. That means the goods have to go up in price, supply and demand. You do not need a PhD from Oxford or Harvard or Yale or Cambridge to know that when you print more money, you're devaluing the currency. Back in a bygone era, when currencies were coinage and the coin was either copper or silver or gold, that people knew how much their actual coin had value in of itself. And governments, when they got into cash crunches, started to reduce the size of the coins. At one point, the Romans started to put a circle, make their coins became donut shaped because that allowed them to have less silver, less gold, less copper in them, and it was inflationary. Now that we're in the era of fiat currencies where there's no gold, no silver, no precious metals, nothing of tangible value backing up our currencies anymore. Our currencies are now called fiat, FIAT currencies, which means they are the value they hold is entirely notional. It's perception. It's people say, well, Canada seems to be a pretty good country. I'll buy Canadian dollars on the international monetary, on the international currency markets. And Canada seems to be going let's get rid of our Canadian dollars. Let's buy American dollars. Let's buy the British pound sterling. And basically, remember when Nortel went to, I think, in and around $140 a share. What was that based on? Was that based on their profit, how much money they were making every year? No, because Nortel never earned one single dime of profit. They lost money every year, but there was a perception in the marketplace that Nortel was a valuable stock to have in your portfolio. So people were willing to keep bidding it higher and higher in price. And it was basically something of a Ponzi scheme, a house of cards. And suddenly, when people started to realize, hey, this Nortel, it's never going to make any money, it's never going to be profitable, eventually it crashed down to basically zero because everyone wanted to sell and there was no one willing to buy it. But it was never even worth the paper that it was printed on. It had no intrinsic value because Nortel, again, never made a single dime of profit. Um, and then Max, with respect to the new member of the family here, is saying, wow, excellent name for a dog and human. Good evening to your dog, Max. Yeah, if you haven't seen her, where is she? Max. With the big guy. And I noticed that in the interim, he had an accident in the hallway. Welcome to dogs with small bladders or puppies. Yeah. Um, I mentioned this before, but I'll throw it in as a side note. The first dog I got as a kid, when it would have been like 1975, 1976, I can't remember the exact year. My first dog was named Max. And Max number one, was a girl. So it was Maxine. And my first Max was a black dog with a white mantle and four white paws, and seeing this dog with a all black with a white mantle, four white paws, Max 2.0. And he's been an amazing dog so far, and I'm sure he's going to be. And then Nancy's writing that Max is a cutie patootie, cutie patootie. Haven't heard that one for a while. Uh, uh, and Max thought that Nancy was going to say that Max Power is a cutie patootie. And Gord's dog isn't bad either. Hey, we need a picture of you, Max Power, before we can do that. Uh, and Nancy's writing that her kid would rip off his face diaper when he was at Costco. Uh, I went through. I can't remember what. I think it was 2021 when the mask mandates had come out and they were being required in schools. Young guy that would have been 2021. He would have been in grade 1 or 2. And I got into an email exchange with his teacher, and a note had come home that, as of such and such a date, students will be required to wear masks that they can take off when they're eating their lunch. Stupidity. So I sent the teacher an article from CBC News that cited a British Medical Journal study, a study published in the scientific journal, the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, that showed that mask wearing, especially cloth masks, could increase an individual's susceptibility to a respiratory infection by 1,300%. And this was based on a study that had been done by an Australian research team, and they had researched medical professionals, and they had compared cloth masks to what they call procedural masks, the kind of, the yellow, blue, white ones you see with the folds and the little clip for the nose. So they had cloth masks, procedural masks, and then N95 masks that pretty much form a very tight seal around the face. And they found that the increased risk of respiratory infection was a 1,300% increased risk if you wore cloth, It was a 200%, double the risk if you wore procedural, the kind that dentists wear, and that if you wore an N95 properly fitted, that the risk was basically zero increased risk of a respiratory infection. So I sent her that article, sent her the study that the article was quoting, and I said I didn't want my guy wearing a mask, and she actually agreed. She said he would not be required to wear a mask at school. But however, she said she would ask that he not sing during school because singing creates more respiratory droplets. And I was willing to take the win. All right, well, fine, don't sing. Besides that, you can't anyway. He doesn't have a great singing voice. No one in our family does. Um, Max, we're getting back to central banks and quantitative easing and all this stuff, says I find it hard to trust central bankers, and they are accountable to no one. Ron Paul ran for president a couple times, and one of his key planks on his platform was to do an audit of the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States. You talk about being gaslit. You talk about being marginalized. You talk about being slandered. Ron Paul suffered all of that. And most Americans are not aware of the fact, I would wager that most Americans are not aware of the fact that the Federal Reserve Bank, what they call the Fed in the United States and Canada, we call it the central bank, the Bank of Canada. These are not government institutions. These are privately held entities, and they're the ones who are printing the money that if you're still like me and you still like to use physical, hard, touchable currency, even though it's a fiat currency, at least, if you pull out a 20 or a 50 or whatever it is, you know, there, hard, something physical, something tangible. That's not the world they want us moving into. The world they want us moving into is where you're just going to be using your debit card, using your cell phone, where eventually it'll be a chip in your hand and you'll be making payments. That already exists now. I think, what's the name of the Amazon company? I think it's Whole Foods or something like that. They've already beta tested having customers getting microchipped and being able to just scan their hand to pay for their purchases. And then you're in a situation where every dollar, every purchase, right down to the digital penny, can be tracked through blockchain technology. And this is not a good situation to be in, because then they makes it super easy to tie in the social credit score. Uh, Max liked my summary of the Weimar Republic's hyperinflation. Thank you. um, and then he's going on to say that back then there were many more farmers who could produce their own food. Not the case with us anymore. Now we're engaged in factory farming. And what do we have happening constantly in Canada, in the US? We have government officials stepping in, and pulling is the term, slaughtering healthy ostriches, 400 of them. No proof that any of those ostriches were infected with anything, but it was suspected that maybe they are. Maybe they're infected. They had been exposed over a year ago. A year ago, these birds were exposed to two birds that we tested, and they tested positive for avian H5N1 bird flu. So, possible 10 months later, maybe they still have it. So, we're going to kill them all. In and around 400. I think it was like just shy of 400, by all accounts, healthy ostriches slaughtered, turkeys slaughtered, chickens slaughtered. How long before it becomes mad cow disease? Are we going to get rid of our cattle clock, cattle flocks, or whatever, herds, I guess the term would be, or swine flu, get rid of all, and then we can all eat laboratory grown meat and drink synthetic milk that's a chemicalized version of dairy milk, which someone on this station pointed out to me and I wasn't aware of. Someone did it in a comment, pointed out that they're now coming out. We've got lab grown meat. They're coming out with lab grown. And this is the world that I think Mark Carney is sold into. I think he is sold into delivering this type of Orwellian dystopian world to the Canadian population. John is saying, Je viens d'arriver. I just got here. Oh, it's my first day. It's not my fault. I've been senior economic advisor to the Trudeau Liberals starting in the year 2020 when COVID hit. But it's my first day. Je viens d'arriver is the French equivalent. Pardon me. I think I need to get some water. Nancy's writing that Nortel was working on cell technology, and that they had Chinese spies inside who stole blueprints that gave birth to the Bell brand Hawaii. I never delved too deeply into that, but I do know there was a case where Hawaii senior executives were arrested and then eventually deported out of Canada. Corporate espionage is massive. And when you look at China with so many of its companies like Hawaii being state owned, the way, that Canada's CBC News is state owned, it's an arm of the government. Well, much of the Chinese companies that we deal with are owned by the Chinese government. These are not entirely private companies. The government of China has their hands in every aspect of the economy. And everyone's saying, evening, I did have a thought that I wanted to get onto, and it's with respect to the social credit score. And I was listening to a podcast earlier today by Vincent Rhodes, who is amongst those who watch my station. I know Danny and Nancy and a few people really enjoy Vincent's content. And his station is called Coffee with Jesus, with coffee standing for Christ offers forgiveness for everyone, everywhere. Coffee. It's like Bible, basic instructions before leaving Earth. Oh, that's what Bible is. That's not what it stands for, but that you get the point. And what I wanted to say with respect, I heard Vincent talking about the fact that right now we live in a capitalistic system, and he touched on it, but I don't think he explained it quite well enough. I think he touched on it, but I think he could have gone deeper. So I want to go a bit deeper. What's the difference between our current system and the social credit system that they're going to be bringing in? I'm going to go that far. They're going to bring this in, and currently, your ability to participate in society is based on the amount of money in your wallet and your bank account, or your ability to draw on money, be it through credit facilities or whatever. But the more money you can put your hands on, the more you can participate in society. You can buy a car, you can travel, you can purchase things. That determines your degree of participation. How much money do you have in your account? Under the social credit system, what will happen is everyone will have a social credit score. And what happens is if you're caught jaywalking, well, your social credit score goes down. If you're late for work, your social credit score goes down. This is the way it works in China. If you are caught online expressing ideas, climate change is a hoax, climate change isn't real, climate has, this idea of anthropogenic human caused climate change is, the climate's always been changing for centuries, going counter narrative. Well, that will cost you. Your social credit card score is going to go down and down and down. And then what happens is you go and you want to get on an airplane, and then you are told, "I'm sorry, regardless of the fact that you have enough money to pay for the ticket, your social credit score is too low. You're not allowed to fly. You're not allowed to leave your city. You are not allowed to." Young person, I use this example all the time, wants to go to a rave in Toronto. Well, your social credit score is too low. You're not allowed to go into the rave. And eventually, currency can be eliminated altogether, and the state will be providing everything to you based on your social credit score. How many calories are you allowed a day in terms of food? Well, if your social credit score is good, you can have up to 3,000. But if it's lower, well, then we're going to reduce it to 1,500, maybe 1,000. This is a kind of Orwellian future that we are staring at, this beastly type system that is going to be coming down the pipe in the years ahead. And eventually, I want to see I want an open fight. But the problem is that the longer it takes, the more they can boil the frog. They can do, if they do things incrementally. There's a lot of people who have a tendency to say, well, let's just see how this plays out. Let's just see how far they try to take it. I mean, it's not too bad right now. It's a little bit annoying, but then they get used to that. Then that becomes the new normal. And then further encroachments come. And again, people say, well, let's see how far they go. Let's see if they try and take this too far. Then they get used to the new restrictions, and they become normalized, and they go, oh, okay, wasn't your, things didn't go as bad as all those doom and gloom conspiracy types were suggesting. And then another step forward, well, hey, it's kind of like what we're doing with Carney. Carney, well, let's give him some time. Let's see. Okay, he's going to, add another 70, $80 billion to the deficit. Well, let's see how this plays out. Let's see how it affects me. Let's just give him some time. And then what we're going to find out is that the cost of living is going to continue increasing. People is going to continue to increase. People are going to be more and more reliant upon the government. Well, I can't afford to go to the dentist. Well, we'll pay for the dentist now. Well, I can't afford to eat. Well, don't worry. We'll come out with some food stamps. We'll come out with a ration system where we'll give you enough to eat. Oh, well, they're looking after me. Okay, let's see how this works out. Let's just see, okay, seems pretty normal, pretty good. Then the next step. This is the world we're looking at. Max goes on to write, let's see, I already read that. Max is writing, I think if things get as bad here as they did in Weimar Germany, in terms of hyperinflation, especially now in Canada and the US, where farmers are becoming so few, many people will accept CBDCs, which are central bank digital currencies. This is the way I see it unfolding, as I was saying. I think as things get worse, people look to the government to solve all their problems. And then we get into a situation like ancient Rome, and Julian, who's a poet back to second century Rome, maybe third. You can look it up, Juvian, and he's the one who came up with the line about bread and circuses. Just give them bread and circuses. Just give them food to eat, fill their bellies, and give them a show. Give them entertainment, and then you can do whatever you like with them. Nowadays, it's here, have some weed, have weed, have some soma. Here's some drugs. Here's your video games. And here, have some synthetic meat. Have some laboratory grown synthetic milk to drink. Eat some crickets, and everything will be fine. And this is not the world that was designed for us by the Lord God, creator of all things. He did not design the world to be as it is. We are living in the days of Noah. The and that is going to be the subject of my Wednesday night live stream. I'm endeavoring to get a schedule going where on Sundays I kind of do a recap of the week's news events. I don't see, that's kind of going to be the theme. And I fixated in on the Carney Liberals and the passing of the budget for this week. But if you want to talk about other things like the G20 summit that just took place in South Africa with Donald Trump abstaining or boycotting, um, or anything else, going on in the world. We can talk about that. And then on Wednesdays will be a faith-based message. And on Wednesday, what I plan on talking about is the story in Genesis of Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. And going to be dealing with that story. I find Lot to be a very interesting, compelling character. And I think that if people are completely honest with themselves, they'll see and I'm talking about professing Christians who profess, Jesus Christ as Lord and, profess to follow Christ. Knowing at the same, I think if we're honest, people will recognize where they fall short. And I think there's a compelling case to be made that a lot of us have elements of Lot in our character, and a lot of elements of Lot's wife in our character. But I don't want to spoil too much. I've had some thoughts on it already. But most will know the story about how Lot, his wife, and their family, how they were rescued from Sodom and Gomorrah before the destruction. Uh, Yeah, Danny's talking about cloned meat. I call it, lab grown meat, lab grown chicken. Yeah, it's scary, scary the way this world is going, but there is hope and there's a way to rebuke that fear. And the way we rebuke that fear is by getting into relationship with the Lord God, creator of all things. And in order to do that, we need to get into relationship with his son, Jesus Christ. He is the bridge. He's the atoning sacrifice that makes us, broken, fallen, sinful creatures able to reconcile ourselves to a perfect and holy and righteous God. How do we do that? Uh, Broken, fallen, sinful, perfect, holy, righteous. How do we come into relationship? Through the blood of Jesus Christ, who died on the cross. Um, and Max likes the topic. Yeah, I'm gonna, just fixate in on one specific passage from the Bible, and it seems fitting that I seem to be going somewhat chronologically now. The most recent one on Wednesday just passed was the Tower of Babel or Babel, and now I'm moving forward from there because it's after the Tower of Babel story that we're introduced to Abraham, and Lot is Abraham's nephew. So Lot is not the one through whom God makes his covenant promise to Abram being, I will make of you a great nation, more than the sand in the desert, more than the, sand by the sea, more than the stars in the sky. Those will be your descendants. I make of you a great nation, and your name is no longer Abram, but is Abraham, which is a reflection of this, you will be the father of many peoples. Lot is his nephew. So he's not the one who these promises are being made to. And yet God has provision for him regardless. God, when he sends destruction upon Sodom and Gomorrah, God ensures the safety of Lot and his family. That's what I'm going to be getting into. I've got Stop Fascism Now is writing that God is dead. Okay. Get a grip. Okay, sure. Religion is the cause of war. Really? Okay. So the Chinese and the Russians, with their communistic God is dead Nietzschean outlook, but we'll go on. It is the power-grubbing greed to take from the poor to feed the rich, blah, blah, blah. Wake up. Okay, so Stop Fascism Now knows everything. We don't need to have any further discussion. All we have to do is go to SFN, Stop Fascism Now, and she will tell us what to think, what to believe, how to feel. And the God is dead. I don't know. Does that mean that do you believe that we live in a created universe, or are you of the belief that everything just came to being magically? Spontaneous generation, just matter floating around in space for aeons, for billions of years, and then poof, pixie dust, something came along, and single-celled organisms suddenly sprang to life, and then from that, they evolved by random accidents, by random mutations, millions upon millions, perhaps billions of random mutations, eventually led to something like the human brain, consciousness, sentience. Well, but Stop Fascism Now. If you want to have meaningful discussion, it helps not to, when you talk like, get a grip. Typically, what you'll do at that point is you'll put someone's back up, and you won't have a meaningful discussion. You won't have meaningful debate. You won't have a fruitful exchange of ideas. You'll just have an argument. And then arguments lead to fights, like war. And anyway, the thing I find most fascinating about those who profess to be anti fascist is that they engage in fascist style machinations. They fight fascism with fascism. Fascism wants to eliminate all dissent. There's only one truth, theirs, and everything else gets censored, suppressed, silenced. And that I find those who proclaim to be against fascism seem to embrace that very tactic of silencing the opposition, screaming over anyone who dares to have the temerity to disagree with them. So fighting fascism with fascism. Uh, yeah, Fascism is an interesting topic to discuss because one of the elements of fascism is said to be nationalism. And we see um, Mark Carney, elbows up, rah, rah, Canada, bleeding maple syrup. And to get elected, he wrapped himself in the Canadian flag and was very nationalist in order. But we'll never be the 51st state. He appealed to the nationalistic pride of the population of this country. And yet nationalism is said to be a a big facet of fascist thought, fascist belief. Now we see it in the United States, certainly. USA, USA, and the MAGA crowd, and America first. Well, it's always a question of degrees. It's always a question of degrees. Is nationalism bad in all its forms? I would argue no. I would argue no. I think a degree of pride in Canada is a good thing. For Americans, it's good for them to be proud of their country. Anyway, this is this is the manner in which I would prefer to approach the thing, but Stop Fascism Now probably just stopped into the stream briefly to mount his or her throne and to pronounce judgment, and then has probably slithered away, and that's fine, whatever the case. But I've been prattling on long enough. I'm going to repudiate what the last comment there is, saying God is dead. No, God is alive. God lives. Jesus Christ lives. Um, And Max is saying that all the trolls who come here sound the same. Well, I wonder to what degree my station is suffering from suppression or so-called throttling, because I'm speaking out against artificial intelligence. I just did a video um, about the uh, about the debate over vaccines in the US. I want to frame this properly because, to be honest, perfectly honest, do I, Gordon Causey, Gordy Canuck, do I believe that vaccines cause autism? And my answer to that is I do not know. Do vaccines cause autism? I do not know. What I find is that there's a pervasive effort going forward now in the mainstream and from government officials in my country, Canada, to tell everyone it is proven. They say it is proven, it's settled, it's this famous settled science that vaccines do not cause autism. My personal view, without having gone, knee deep into the research, but my personal view is that I am 100% perfectly okay with further extensive, exhaustive research going into that question, because I'm one of those who believes that science, it is not science if you cannot challenge and question it. So the experts, so-called, say that vaccines do not cause autism. Well, then those same experts should invite further investigation into that question, perhaps more comprehensive studies. I've heard a lot of the talking points on it, but I haven't gone deep into the research papers, into the peer-reviewed articles. But when a study is done on a vaccine, what is the placebo being used? It is my understanding that for to operate under the gold standard of science, the placebo should be something inert, like a sugar pill. Um, like in the case of a vaccine, something like a saline solution, something with no medicinal value whatsoever, so that you can measure, what are the outcomes in the dosed group and what are the outcomes in the placebo group. However, it's my understanding that in vaccine trials, that much of the time, some of the time, maybe all the time, like I said, I haven't gone too deeply into this. Well, in cases, what they do is they measure the results off not against a genuine placebo, but against another vaccine. So one vaccinated group against another vaccinated group. That's not a true placebo. A true placebo, according to my non-expert understanding from what I gleaned, from some science courses that I took at the university level, is that a genuine placebo should be a sugar pill, or in the case of vaccines, something like saline solution, salt water. What else is being written? Danny once again has come in with Jesus is King. Amen, brother. And then Max is writing, it feels a bit like the cigarettes don't cause cancer campaign a few decades ago, even though there was clear evidence that it did, and the whole industry knew it. Back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, as health concerns over cigarettes rose, the tobacco industry, not wanting their product to be associated with health risks, engaged medical and scientific researchers to conduct studies. And they were actually able to prove, based on the protocols that they laid out, that they showed that cigarettes were in fact healthy. This Camel, the cigarette your doctor smokes. And they had all kinds of campaigns making claims that cigarettes had a health benefit to them. Now, if we had stopped and said, okay, the science is settled, the studies have been done, they've all proven, well, then we'd still be seeing tobacco companies advertising cigarettes on TV telling us that they're healthy. But the science wasn't settled. They continued doing studies and they continued the research, and eventually the causational link between cigarette smoking and um, and certain negative health outcomes was firmly established is the pharmaceutical industry. They have a product, they have products, they make billions of dollars selling vaccines, MMR, diphtheria, I don't know, malaria. There's all kinds of them. You know, just look at the vaccination schedule in the United States. I don't know what it is in Canada now, but I maybe someone here knows how many shots a kid takes before they're a year old. Uh, And I did read up on a study conducted by, I don't know exactly who conducted it, but CNN and other outlets have quoted it. And what the study showed was that the incidence of autism amongst the Amish was 1 in 271, as compared to the broader US population, where the incidence of autism is now said to be 1 in 31, 32, something like that. So, why is autism so rare in the Amish community, 1 in 271, and so much more common in the broader population, United States, 1 in 31, 32, something like that? Why the massive difference? Is it because the Amish don't vaccinate their children? And that's a reasonable question to ask in my mind, unless I make billions of dollars or tens or hundreds of billions of dollars a year selling vaccines. In that case, that's a scary question. I don't even want to ask it. I don't want to investigate it because, heck, if a link is found, what about my yacht? What about my private jet? What about my home in Tuscany and my you know home on the French Riviera, my vacation places? What am I going to do? Scary notion. Uh, I'm not willing to say that I think that vaccines cause autism. I just want the proper studies to be done with true placebos. I want thorough investigation done to determine point blank whether or not there's a risk. Uh, and I'm willing to allow that. Let's face it, there are so many other factors that could be in play as well. Could be diet, could be heredity, could be lifestyle. In terms of heredity, these Amish old order communities, quite often you know, it, they're the kids being born into these communities are products of a more shallow gene pool than typically I think one would see in larger urban centers. So that's one. The diet, they eat a lot healthier than I believe the general population does, not the preservatives we see everywhere else. So, and lifestyle, they're getting a lot more sunshine, physical labor. There's so many factors that could play into the explosion in autism beyond just vaccines. So, and maybe vaccines are an element of it, but maybe I don't know. Do the studies, do the work. And I don't think the pharmaceutical industry genuinely wants that work to be done, not because they know that that there is a causational link, merely because I think the pharmaceutical industry is afraid of the potential. Look what happened to Pfizer when the health effects of Bextra, Bextra, were finally discovered. It cost them billions of dollars in fines, and there was talk within U.S. circles and U.S. governmental circles of shutting Pfizer down because of the number of deaths and heart problems that an anti-inflammatory drug approved as safe and effective in 2000, had caused. Bextra proved as safe and effective in 2000, anti-inflammatory. 2005 removed from the shelves because of heart damage and death. Check into it yourself if you like. Anyway, uh, just trying to catch up. Max is saying that seems like leftists should care if science is robust and hasn't been captured by industry and special interests. It's funny about the left. The left used to push back against government overreach, used to push back against the corporate sector. Now they seem to have been captured by it. It's one of these paradoxes. Max is further saying that he agrees with me that I don't. He doesn't know either. He's saying he's if there is a link between vaccines and autism. I don't. Uh, uh, but he goes on to say that it seems strange that even daring to question it invites all kinds of attacks from the left who claim to be, well, I think it's a case where anyone who can get a leg up on you, if they can find any, the thin slim of the wedge, any way that they can find to show their intellectual, moral superiority, to show themselves as being more virtuous and whatever, any port in a storm. If well, he's against vaccines, so there you go. He's an anti-vax type guy. Even whatever. It's annoying, this world that we live in, and so many of the problems are caused by the fact that we've become so digital in our orientation. We've reduced everything down to 148 characters in a tweet. Into if you can't get it out in a 1-2 minute TikTok video, well, then no one's going to pay attention. It's got to be short, sweet, and to the point. And life is more complicated than that a lot of the time. But people like, well, just give me the bottom line. That's all they want. They just want the bottom line. And so, and the government is there to say it's a proven fact. The Canadian government, Health Canada, is here to tell you, dumb Canadian people, that it is a proven fact that vaccines conclusively do not cause autism. How many times have we heard science say, during the COVID era, they would never admit that they were wrong. Initially, we were told that COVID spreads through respiratory droplets, that it's not aerosolized, that it's not an airborne illness. And then it is airborne. It is aerosolized. So you were wrong before. Well, no, we weren't wrong. The science evolved. That's their line. The science evolved. No, you made a guess based on limited information and you were wrong. And then when you got a fuller, broader picture of the reality, then you corrected your mistake. But they don't want to say that because if an authoritative body admit this is political, they don't want to ever admit to having been wrong because that diminishes trust. And there are individuals who are still blindly trusting of health officials, of government, of major corporate bodies. They say they're trustworthy. And when you admit, when someone in a position of trust makes a mistake and admits that they were wrong, that trust is eroded. Those of us with eyes to see, ears to hear, brains to think will recognize that I don't trust the nightly news anymore. I don't trust government officials anymore. I don't trust health officials that go in and out. They go from Health Canada to the pharmaceutical industry, then from the pharmaceutical industry back to Health Canada. I don't like this incestuous relationship between the industry being policed and the industry itself. That doesn't pass the smell test. But there's still a lot of people who don't want to read into things. They don't want to investigate further. It's more comfortable just to trust blindly. And the only place we should place that trust is in the Lord God, creator of all things. Anyway, Whale has come on and says, right, with an exclamation point. If you examine how lab test mice are biologically engineered through breeding, they are a problem due to their abnormal telomere length. Poisons in tests tend to extend their longevity. And then he gives it a big check mark that you're going beyond my ken when you get into that. And I've read the word, or I've come across that word before, telomere, but I'd have to refresh myself on that. And then Max Power goes on to write, the sound of the world's tiniest violin playing for the billionaires who will not be able to buy a new yacht this year. All right. Well, I've gone on an hour and 20 minutes. Thank you, everyone, for chiming in. Max has another thing to say. He says that in psychology, there is something called just world theory, where people have a tendency to want to see the world as just and moral. It is more comforting, and they tend to ignore signs of corruption. I was mentioning this to, you can find it. Uh, there, there's a study that was done by university students or university psychology department, I believe, and the conformity, I'll call it a conformity experiment. And what they did is they had a young woman go in for a medical screening test, and she was the subject. So she went in, and unbeknownst to her, this was all staged. It was all set up. She went up and she checked in for her appointment, and then she sat down in the waiting room, and everyone sitting, another, 8 or 9 people were sitting in the waiting room. They were all in on the experiment. This young woman was not. And every 30 seconds, every minute or so, there would be a mechanical beep noise. And at the sound of the beep, all the actors, all the who were engaged in this experiment, the actors all stood up and then sat down. 30 seconds, 45 seconds later, and they all stood up again and they all sat down. And the woman was sitting there and watching them. And then after 3 or 4 times, she joined in and she started standing up on each beep. And then slowly, the actors would go in for their phony appointments. And eventually, she was left alone. Got down to just one other person. They're both standing on the beep. And then that last other person leaves, and she's all by herself, and she stands up. She's not being coerced. She's now willingly participating in just going along, even though there's no one to go along with. Then another individual he's not in on it. He came in, and she continued to stand up on the beep. And after 2 or 3 times, this guy turns to her and says, "Why are you standing at that beep?" And she said, "I don't know. Everyone was doing it when I got here, so I've just kept doing it." And the beep comes again. She stands up, and eventually the second guy started to do it as well. I'm sure other people have seen it. Uh, and then Max is saying a lot of these psychology studies took place in the 1960s or so and were later banned. But I think government and military are doing uh, far deeper psychological studies like and psyops. And he gives the famous example of MK Ultra. Just prior to 2020, just prior to the COVID psyop, the Canadian Armed Forces engaged in an op in Nova Scotia, wherein they wanted to monitor and evaluate and analyze the population's response to the threat of wolves, wild wolves. So they put out leaflets and pamphlets and uh, misinformation about wolves, a band of wild wolves that were attacking people and were a real threat and danger. And they wanted to see how well this took hold of the community. And then they even went into the woods with sound equipment and had the sound equipment playing the sound of wolves howling. And all the while, they were monitoring the population's response to this. Even CBC News reported on it. You can find it. Nova Scotia, wolves, PSYOP, and see what you come across. So this kind of thing, even our small little Canadian military has been engaged in it. Uh, and and Max is saying, with respect to that study, you can find the videos here on YouTube. He said that Humans have a strong tendency to conform for sure. There is utility in conformity. I'll share a little bit that I came across. Um, Zoologists, I guess you would call them, individuals who study animals and animal populations, were studying zebras and zebra behavior. The only problem is zebras all look alike. So you'd be sitting there and you try and center in on one particular animal and you're taking note of his behavior. But then you look down at your paper after writing and you look back up and which one was it again? You can't remember which one was the zebra you were watching when you're trying to differentiate individual type behavior. So what the investigators did is they went and they marked a zebra. They put a red mark on the flank of a leg or on both legs, whatever, so that they could easily identify and then, you know, chronicle that one specific individual's behavior. However, that was not a good thing. That zebra was killed by lions. Why? Because the lions then had a way in which to differentiate that one zebra. It allowed them to isolate that zebra for an attack, whereas otherwise they had this huge aphomoris, herd where it was hard to coordinate an attack. So conformity going along is kind of a bit of a survival technique that human, that I think it permeates the animal kingdom and even enters into the human realm. We see it as a means to survival. Uh, but the world is full of tension, the world is full of paradoxes, and I think there's a point at which things can be taken too far, taken to the extreme. And at that point, it's not just the individual who's risking their health, life, whatever, but then the entire herd. And that's getting way too deep. Uh, and then he's writing that for something to be a fact, it has to be proven. And and then he says, "Proven." The words "proven fact," that's redundant. Well, if it's a fact, that automatically assumes it's been proven. If it's proven, then that automatically assumes it's a fact. That is redundant to say it that way, and it's also repetitive. It's also saying the same thing more than once, being cute. Uh, and then Max is saying, true, the tendency to conform is not inherently bad, but it appears to be they're exploiting it. Those in power are exploiting it to further their agenda. Oh, yeah. And that's sometimes where I look at myself and I wonder, why am I so prone? I have a tendency to, if everyone's going right, I go left. If everyone's going north, I want to go south. And what is it about me that makes me such a contrarian? And I think a lot of it is ingrained from my life experience, having constantly been, when I was 9 years old, we moved back to Canada from the United States, where I'd gone through kindergarten, one, two, grades 1, 2, 3, 4. And now all of a sudden I found myself not conforming. I didn't talk the right way. I didn't talk like a Canadian. And so I was different. And I didn't like it. I didn't like being the odd one. I was getting into a fight every day for the first couple of weeks of school. I didn't say foyer. I said, hey, let's go to the front foyer of the school. And I didn't say, I beg your pardon or pardon. I said, what? What did you say? Yeah, I said, what? Beg your pardon. Who am I that came? And, am I in the royal family here? I beg your pardon. Come on. And my sneakers, I called them sneakers. I didn't call them runners like the rest of the, good Canadian kids. But over the year and a bit that we lived in Burlington, I adapted and I learned to conform to, become a good Canadian. And then we moved back to the US. And I was living in Portland, Oregon. And all of a sudden, the shoes that I was wearing that in New Jersey were sneakers, that in Burlington were my runners. Now they were my tennis shoes. And I didn't say, when you wanted to say sorry about that, I'm Canadian says sorry. And, on the West Coast, Portland, Oregon, sorry, sorry. And you got to learn long vowel sounds. Had to learn to talk again. But, eventually I got learn, and then we moved back to Canada when I was going into grade 7, and I'm back and I don't conform. I'm always outside, and it became something of my default position to be on the outside looking in. So I'm more comfortable if everyone's going in one direction, I'm going in the other. And I thank God for it. I thank God for it because it has allowed me to recognize a lot of times where that don't wash. You want people to wear a mask when they're standing but not sitting? That's stupid. You think that going down the grocery store aisle, everyone going in the same direction, that this is gonna help? That's stupid. You want daycare workers putting masks on little kids? That's not the way you use personal protective equipment, especially medical grade PPE. That doesn't wash. I'm like, oh, whereas I found most of the population, well, they said whatever the government says, well, the government's being is testing you to see how stupid you are. And you're showing them that you're pretty damn stupid. You got to have an IQ damn near 80. Come on, use your brain. You can all go into Walmart. You can all go into Home Depot. We can have Amazon warehouses with hundreds of workers going in and out. And even though they have hundreds of confirmed cases of COVID, we won't keep them shut. Well, we're going to shut that little mom and pop outfit out. We're going to hammer the crap out of the small business sector, but we're going to make the Amazons, the Home Depots, the Weston family. We're going to make the rich exponentially richer, and we're going to hammer the poor, said the morons. Anyway, uh, I like what Max is writing here. He writes, Christ was not a conformer. He stuck his neck, he did more than stick his neck out. He bore the ultimate penalty. Something I learned, the word excruciating comes from crucifixion. Ex is the Latin for to take off of, and crucius is from whence we get excruciating. And so something that is excruciating, that's directly referencing the death that Jesus experienced. So, uh, and then Max, with respect to my contrarian outlook, is saying maybe that's where the inner contrarian that we all have comes from. I think we need more contrarians. We need more people willing to push back. And I almost am saying, come on, you globalist WEF types, bring it on, bring it on. And I won't use AI. I'll keep up with this miserable, pathetic little station, and I'll keep talking about it in my face-to-face conversations. I've added a couple subscribers over the last week who are people who I've met at work. So, at any rate, I'll end the stream now over an hour and a half in. I got to work tomorrow. So may the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord God Almighty make his face to shine upon you. And may the Lord God Almighty, creator of all things, grant you peace. And that's the end of tonight's stream. So thank you, everyone. And we'll see you all again Wednesday night. And hopefully between now and Wednesday, I'll have some content going up talking about, any number of things. Whatever happens to come on my mind. Thanks very much, Max Power and Whale and Danny and Nancy, and even to the fascist who said God is dead. Thank you for showing up. Everyone who shows up, hey, nothing but love. So we'll talk to you all later. Night.